Hey everyone, today I want to talk about why people don't and do go to church. In my experience, there's often a profound confusion among church leaders about why people don't or do go to church. And not all believe the same thing, of course, but this is such a common misconception, it seems to me, that it's worth talking about. Now, here are some necessary points of clarity of why people either do go to a church or they don't. First, God designed humans with primal, basic needs. That is, God designed us with these needs, and it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a human, you have basic needs. And many of you remember the main thesis of much of Abraham Maslow's work several decades ago. But we need to embrace this fact, really. In fact, this is the most important fact of what I'm talking about today. You need to understand this. People, you and me, Christians and non-Christians, are constantly making choices in life because it meets at least one need. I think Abraham Maslow was right on, that people do in fact make choices all the time because we're trying to get needs met. So basically, why don't people come to your church? Because you don't meet their needs. Let me say that again. Why don't people come to your church? Because you don't meet their needs. They see the church as irrelevant. Why do people stay in your church? Because you are meeting their needs. I absolutely guarantee it. Now, how do I know it? Because that's how humans were wired by God. I didn't design humans. I didn't make this up. What is so shocking is how overwhelmingly oblivious church leaders can be concerning this fact of human behavior. We humans make choices every single day. You do, I do, to get our needs met. That's why. That's why people have their behaviors. Second point of clarity that's really important to understand, there are needs people know they have, and there are needs they don't know they have. And it's crucial to understand both. For example, my son doesn't know he has a need to study hard now in 5th grade so that he will do well in high school and university. Now, even though I've told him this many, many times. My son doesn't know that's a need, of course, because he can't grasp the future as a child. He has this need. He's just not aware of this need. He is aware that he has other things, other needs like eating and sleeping and drinking and messing with his sister. The other needs he is aware of. Now, the same is true of those who go to church. We can tell non-Christians all day long to our nose bleeds that they, quote, have a need to know Jesus and be forgiven and join our incredible community of believers. The only problem is they don't care. In general, they are not aware of that need. They really don't care about those supposed needs. Maybe you're still in denial about this, but you need to accept it, and fast. Look, previous generations held to a law of morality, this general sense of morality and doing the right thing. They basically understood that. If you went to an older person, everyone before maybe the 60s, and said, you need to do the right thing, or we could rather assume they had a sense of guilt about them. But in general, the younger generations in our country, at least, do not believe in universal morality. They do not fear judgment from God. They don't believe in God. They're not living in guilt or shame. They deliberately hang out with other people who behave like they do, feel complete social acceptance, and continue to behave how they want. They are not guilt-ridden. They are not seeking grace. They are not looking for religion. In fact, just a few days ago, I had a person about 21 years old tell me how she hated religion. I'm not saying people today in general don't understand the concept of guilt or doing the wrong thing. People who have that kind of disorder are called sociopaths. What I mean is today's generations are different from those before maybe the 1960s. They're just different. And today in general, there's not an assumption. It is not a safe assumption to believe that people, we can just talk to them and assume there's some degree of morality. Then we can just say that's not right to do. And they're not going to understand that. They're going to look at you crazy and say, what do you mean? There's just preference. There's just what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And just like my son and his homework, we can tell people they have needs all day long. It doesn't mean they're really aware and really feel those needs. Now, why does my son do his homework? Because I can discipline if he doesn't. He respects my authority. He's afraid of being grounded. I guarantee you it's not because he feels a deep need to prepare for his adulthood. And we have no authority over the non-Christian like that. You can threaten them hell, but that only works for a small minority of people. Of course, not to mention how stupid that is for a marketing campaign for a church. When we threaten people with a "you'll be sorry if you don't" message to get them to our churches, you'll just scare them off and aver their attitude toward the church they already have. So my second point is, there are needs people know they have and needs they don't know they have. And we need to know the difference when we talk about those in and outside of the church. There's no need in trying to convince outside people of a need they do not realize they have. It's wasted time. Third, you could list several needs that are common to every human and list certain needs that particular generations have. Now let's talk about both points. First, what are some common human needs? Now this is where Maslow's hierarchy of needs is so helpful. Now, even if you might nuance each category differently, at the basic level is physiology, breathing, food, water, procreation, sleep, and so forth. The basic needs. You might think bare minimum if you're on the hospital bed. Just bare minimum. Right above that is safety. Security of the body, of employment, of resources, the family, of health, of property. It's a sense of, you might say, degree of emotional safety. The bottom level is maybe physical safety. The next level is emotional safety. Above that is a sense of belonging or love. Friendships, family, sexual intimacy for married people, adults. And of course above that would be esteem, value, achievement, fulfillment, respected by others and respecting others. And at the top, the sense of spontaneity and problem solving, creative thinking, and so forth. And of course, in psychology, we call these top levels of esteem and self-actualization. We call them higher order thinking, as it were. We're beyond just shelter and food and so forth. Now, Maslow never used a pyramid, of course, but the pyramid picture that everyone's seen before, it's helpful because it reminds us of how fewer and fewer people achieve the, quote, higher order needs at the top. So that's what's common to all people. You can meet any human, in or outside the church, and realize they have common needs. That's a fact. And you need to be aware of what the needs are. The second thing, my second point here is, while there are numerous needs common to all people, there are also specific needs to different generations. And I know, of course, generalities and stereotypes exist whenever we talk about what an entire generation of people think or feel. Okay, so I'm aware that not every single person fits these categories. Yet, these categories are still helpful. They're still helpful. Now, here's some quick examples that are related for church or church work. Those born before the 70s and 80s, called the silent generation, way back, and then the baby boomer generation, have these needs. Now, there's a bunch of them, but I'm just giving a few as they relate to church particularly, but they have these needs. To build institutions that last. Institutions, now which means they love buildings and pews and chairs and rooms and brick and mortar, things like that. 2, they leave a legacy. They have a need to leave a legacy, which means they love placards and bricks with their names on it, and they love to tell younger generations about what they've built. They're very, very, very proud of what they've built, and they'll tell everybody about it. They have a need to follow social etiquette established by their parents and authority figures, which means they feel very guilty. They can feel very guilty if they break the, quote, rules within the church, like not running, or not wearing your Sunday best clothes, or not being completely quiet and still during the sermon, which is respectful, not talking back to your parents, and so forth. They also have a need to feel safe by establishing stability, traditions, and patterns. They have a need to be identified by their involvement in a peer group, especially peer groups that are respected. The more institutionalized, the better. That is to say, the more that peer group adopts the values and needs of that generation, the better off they are. If I've heard once, I've heard thousands of times from the older generations at every church I've ever worked, how much they brag about how they are part of the biggest Bible study class, the one that gives the most amount of money, the one who has been around the longest. We're the oldest or longest going Bible study there is. They're very, very proud of the institutionalized nature of their group. And that is a marked difference from younger generations. The last thing I'll talk about for them, they have a need to be certain in what they believe. Just certain, in the sense of having it, quote, figured out. Not about everything in life, but about their faith. It's something they can't be shaken on. Now, I'm not saying any of these needs are good or bad. I'm just saying these are This is commonplace amongst those who study the generations. Those born during and after the 1980s, we call the Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z these days, have a lot of needs in common. Again, let me say this one more time, because when you're getting mad at me right now saying, David, I know plenty of people that age and they don't act that way at all. And you're right. I can think of individual examples for whom this is not true. But in general, this is true. Not only by people who specialize in this, but also in all of my experience on earth. But anyway, so Generation X, Y, and Z have some common needs. They have a need to question the usefulness and integrity of institutions. That means, it means they have no loyalty in maintaining or paying for the very institutions their parents and grandparents built. They also have a deep sense, a need to make sure the institution has integrity. Most people, younger generations, assume institutions are out to get you. They can't be trusted. Have you seen any empty church buildings lately? Younger generations do not have a loyalty to maintaining institutions. They also have a need to be involved in causes that help, orphans, endangered animals, widows, AIDS victims, homeless, etc., regardless if those causes are related to a church at all, because it gives them a purpose and a meaning in life. Also because in younger generations, it's just cool to support causes. But they'll find meaning and purpose in real causes, but it's not always linked to a church. That's very important. So causes matter. And they really, speaking of causes, younger generations want to know the cause is actually doing its job. They like to be hands-on. They don't always like to pay for someone else to go do the work. They want to go dig that well. They want to go on the trip. They want to experience it. And that's something I'll talk about in a second. They also have a third need, to be accepted just as they are, which means they really, really disdain any hint of judgment or condemnation. In fact, if you talk to a younger generation person, someone born in the late 70s, 80s on to today, one of the number one things you can do to get them to stop talking immediately about their opinion about anything, you say one magic phrase, and it's an accusation, and it's this: don't judge me. If you say don't judge me, you stop almost every single person in his or her tracks, because they're scared to death of being seen as judgmental. It's the number one virtuous rule of a social contract, as it were, at least in America, for a younger generation. They don't ever want to be judged, so they have a big need to be accepted just as they are. They also have a big need to be adaptable to the culture at large. Being adaptable to the culture at large is very important. Now, this is crucial because they're more influenced by social media and Hollywood than churches or institutions. That's very important to understand. Being uncool or not modern is very embarrassing. Now, you can dress like you're from the 50s, but that's retro. In other words, that's on purpose. But to not be part of the crowd is really a big deal. And the crowd is not the church. The crowd is culture at large, social media, movies, songs, and so forth, what they do at the club. Another need that younger generations have is to experience things. That is more feeling than simply thinking about it, which is why statistics demonstrate, they're more open to charismatic traditions. They don't just want to talk about things cerebrally. They want to feel it. Experience is huge for our younger generations. They also have a need to express their individuality, even if they do have some need to be in a peer group. But that individuality means they can find, quote-unquote, find God or find spirituality apart from the church, all on their own. They don't need churches to tell them how to find a spirituality. It is striking how much you can find a young person and say, do you believe in God? They might say no. You say, are you a spiritual person? They say yes. If you say, which tradition do you come from? They're going to look at you crazy. They're going to say, I just do what I want. Older generations did not think that way in general. And last but not least, they also have a need to doubt what they have believed. They don't want to have to figure it all out. They like that gray area. They like that. Now, you can already tell, these are huge contrasts. The needs between these two generations, broadly speaking, several generations, the two halves I made it, you see some gargantuan distinctions. By the way, if you want to learn more about the new generations, Generation IY, there's a book called Generation IY that speaks specifically about that generation, and it is incredible. Generation Z, is still so young. They're still working on the patterns. Let me make a little quick reflection. If you didn't already, now you see why the generations squabble over the style of worship. Each side approaches the issue with different needs to be met, and then judges anyone else who doesn't see it their way. You could say the same about paying the bills on a building, the color of the carpet, whether or not your preacher wears a tie, and on the generational battles rage. All because they have different needs. What's also sad about that is the fact that when a person or generation confuses their particular cultural needs or cultural preferences as gospel, as God ordained, then we are on bad, slippery slope tracks. That's bad news. And that there's a term for that in the biblical witness in the New Testament, the Gospels in particular. That's the same kind of thing that they called the tradition of the elders. And Jesus constantly opposed that. And that's for any generation who takes their particular preferences and elevates it above the gospel. Another sad part of this fact of these different needs of the generation is that every generation dies off. Every generation dies off. And that's a no-brainer newsflash, I get it. But it dies off. Is your church headed for complete closure in 10, 20, or 50 years? Because of your refusal to adapt at all to the different generational needs? Many, many churches I've been in are holding on for dear God hope that somehow, some way, the young people are going to come running in. And the people who want it so badly are convinced if you'll just do it being ministry or church marketing or whatever, if you'll do it like they did it back when I was a kid, they'll come. They'll come. They have no idea that the way they approached the whole idea of getting people to the church has changed radically. And if that method doesn't change, your church, that particular local church body, will die off. It happens every day all over the world. Fourth, last but not least, about needs. People might come to your church to meet certain needs, but they might stay in your church to meet other needs. Let me say that one more time. They might come to your church to meet certain needs, but they might stay in your church to meet other needs. Now, this distinction matters much, at minimum, in the way you market your church. So a whole lot could be said about this. Let me give a quick example using the point I just made above, okay? Younger generations chiefly come to a church because they were invited by someone who was cool or normal, or they were just seeking out this meaning, purpose, God, which is all related to them. Maybe they wanted to join a cause associated with the church. Maybe they heard that your church, or you knew a friend, Susie, was going to help the Nigerian orphans, and she heard that Susie's doing it because her church is doing it, and then she came to church with you. Or maybe they're just seeking for God or spirituality in general. Sometimes that happens. The point is, they usually do not come to church because they have a sense of social obligation, because my parents made me, because they want to leave a legacy, because they want to go build a building, because they have a positive view of the church or Christians. None of that. None of that. That was a long time ago. It's not now. It's very different. They will be intrigued by their visit if they feel, or I think if three main things happen. If three main things happen, they'll be intrigued by, this church might be something I can stick around in. One, they feel safe. By the safe, I mean not judged, accepted as they are, not expected to change their clothes or whatever to be accepted. Now, they're going to call this friendly if you ask them. Or they might even say, I didn't feel judged, I felt accepted. That's a big, big, big deal. And it's the number one law. If you don't know this about people, you need to know this. You need to know this. And I appreciate when I first heard Peter Lord say this years ago. He's exactly right. People will change to be like the people who accepted them. People will change to be like the people who accepted them. See, the problem is we got it all backwards. We expect people to come to church. We got to change them and clean them up before they come to church. That was the old model. But newer generation, those churches are booming because they do not require them to change before they walk in the door. They haven't showered? So what? They wear flip-flops? Who cares? Got Starbucks in your hand? So what? They go to Starbucks. It's part of life. It's part of life. Put your cell phone up. Nope, not for young generations. Why would I do that? It's part of everything. Their Bible, their apps, their email, everything's on it. The Twitter, everything's on their phone. So the number one thing is they don't feel judged when they're at their church. If no one looks at them crazy or says, I can't believe he's dressed like that or she did that. If you do that to your young generation, they're out the door immediately and they'll never come back. So number one, they feel safe and not judged. Number two, they feel entertained by their experience. And this is where people in church life usually get so worked up. It's not an entertainment. The bottom line is get over it. You just need to get over it because they want to be entertained. Now, why is that? Because that's the way young generations work. We want to experience something. We want to experience it. Now, by that I mean there's our senses, touch, taste, and smell, and whatever. They need to be reminded like we're in a modern era. I mean, modern visual images, modern video clips, modern logos, modern sounding music, and so forth. That's what makes them entertained. There's nothing more boring for a younger generation to stare at a person preach behind a pulpit in an expensive suit while we sit there and listen for 30 minutes to an hour. That is going to make everybody go to sleep. Not really everybody, I get it, but that is overwhelmingly boring. Younger generations need some clips. You got to have pictures. You got to have some sound. You need some props. You need something to keep their attention. And we can protest that reality all we want. That's not right. That's not right. Back in my day, we didn't need all that. And that's true. Back in the medieval times, all the way back in the 4th century, St. Augustine, so forth, they would preach for 3 hours at a time standing up. But the preacher sat. Teachers sat down when they taught as a sign of authority. Even in Jesus' day, he did that. They would stand up to read the text and sat down to teach, but everybody else stood for hours at a time. So I get it. I'm with you. Attention spans have gotten so much worse. We have two options. Either we keep protesting it. I don't want all them videos. That's fine. Your church is going to die. They'll die off with your generation. Or we stop protesting and saying, you know what? The times have changed. If we want to keep their attention, we got to have more than just someone talking in a monotonous voice. So 1, don't feel judged. 2, they need to be somewhat entertained by their senses. And 3, the message by the preacher has to sound inviting and normal. It needs to have meaning and purpose all through it. And really mainly, it needs to address the real world issues they face every day, like divorce, relationships, money, job struggles, addictions, whatever. That is, the sermon needs to, they need to understand how the sermon needs to address how God, the Bible, the church, interacts with their daily routines and with real issues in their world. Real issues in their world. And that appeals to the younger generations. It needs to be real world. Recently, a guy named Mark Driscoll got fired from his church, and they all shut the churches down, or they had the option of doing it. And he was very, very real, and he said a bunch of stuff that I would argue is very inappropriate and not at all how Jesus would talk. But one of the major reasons why so many people came to his church and bought his books and listened to him on his sermon and podcast is because he spoke so real. I think he was also crude on top of that, but we can have reality without being crude. And the fact is, if sermons are not real, if they don't sound like something I can relate with when I leave the church building and wake up Monday morning, I need to remember how that text, that biblical text, how Jesus, how the kingdom of God relates to my real world. And if you don't do that, you've lost them. They have to feel safe. They have to be entertained. They have to have a message that matters with real world stuff. Now, if all those things happen, and finally, inside the church, they make some honest to God, authentic relationships with people, then they'll stay. Once they get involved in the church, then they're going to discover their sin and their need for forgiveness. It is a need they have. I got it. That is, they're going to begin to really value the, quote, Christian needs, or like Christian relationships and forgiveness and grace and so forth. Now, they've always had their generational needs and every human need. Now they've added these, we might call Christian needs on top of that. I know those Christian needs are true and real, so spare me the emails. I'm not saying Christian needs means they're fake. They are real. It just means they weren't aware of it. Just like my son's lack of awareness of a need to study hard in school because of how the future's come. He didn't see it. But he will one day, and just like how people come to church. When they really realize their sinfulness and the need for grace, they get it. But they don't get it until they get into the system, into the narrative, into the story inside the church. So I'm going to wrap up. So in general, why do people join a church? Because it meets certain needs they have. In general, why do people not join church? Because they do not believe the church will meet their needs. It doesn't matter if they can articulate the needs. That doesn't matter. They have them whether or not they can articulate them. To say it once more, to outside people, churches are just irrelevant. They get their needs met in other ways. They want to give, they feel like they want to join a cause, fine. There's thousands of causes to join. In fact, there are causes that have a lot of money and they know where their money goes. They see it on commercials. They go visit Dig That Well and whatever. They can join a cause. They don't need a church for that. If they have a need to be close with God, they don't have a need for that. They can do it on their own. They don't need the church. And on it goes. So if they perceive as the church as a place where their needs don't get met, they don't go. If you're stuck in a church that continues to squabble over whether or not they call it Sunday school, or whether or not the music is a rock concert, then your situation is dim indeed. It might mean that your church, and perhaps its leaders, are unaware of the role needs play in the church's life. They might just be ignorant about the whole show and don't mean anything bad by it. Worse still, it might mean that your church has become irrelevant. What is your church doing to address the needs of your people? What are your needs? How are you getting them met at church? God bless you. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. To listen to other podcasts, go to iTunes and search up A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom. There you can subscribe to all the podcasts. They'll be automatically updated to whatever program you use, or of course through iTunes. Or you can go through my website, davidpendergrass.com. If you want more information about the marriage retreats that I lead, or more information about the consulting that I do, go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com. If you'd like to contact me directly, find me on Twitter at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, and I will do my best to respond to your Twitter comment or question, and maybe even address your issue on the air on my podcast. I'll see you online.